Welcome everyone to this session about language and mapping with some of the tribal leaders from Native communities in Southeast Louisiana. We're going to go ahead and introduce ourselves and we'll get started with our panel. Does anybody want to go first?
Elder Rosina.
Okay. I am Atakapa-Ishak-Chawasha from the Grand Bayou Village here in Louisiana. My name is Rosina Philippe, and I wish to say thank you to everyone who has logged in to our session, and a special thanks to the National Council on Public History for making a space for our truths to be spoken and that we may share our truths with everyone on. Thank you very much.
And I'm Chief Albert Nakan. I'm the traditional chief of Atakapa-Ishak-Chawasha, Biloxi, Chittimacha, Choctaw, Indian Tribe of Louisiana. And I did Rosina. We're here to speak our thoughts about what had happened to us in the past. Chief Sherelle.
Hi, everybody. I am Chief Sherelle Parfait-Dordor. I am with the Grand Caillou-Dulac Band of Biloxi, Chittimacha, Choctaw here in coastal Louisiana. And again, thanks to all of you for joining with us today. And very big thanks to of course, the creator for this opportunity to educate and share knowledge with everyone.
I'm Teresa Dardar, and I'm with the Pointe Chien Indian Tribe. And I want to thank y'all all for attending and also to giving us the chance to speak our truth.
And hi everyone, my name is Devin Parfait. I'm the future chief of the Grand Caillou-Dulac Band of Biloxi, Chittimacha, Choctaw, a student at Williams College, and also now an Allison Davis Research Fellow. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a presentation to give you background on some of the issues that Louisiana faces, along with the tribal communities. Okay. Can you guys see my screen? Is this good?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a beautiful picture of Bayou Pointe Chien that was just pointed out by Miss Teresa. And it's just got a beautiful rainbow, and it's just a really great picture of Louisiana to give you a little bit of context of the area that we're talking about. Let's see. And so this is the area that we're talking about, South Louisiana. This is the state of Louisiana, if some of you are familiar with it. And the tribal communities are situated in some of the southernmost parts of coastal Louisiana. And the story of land loss and sea level rise is nothing new. You may have seen stories and headlines about the devastation that happens during some of the hurricanes, or the issue of rising sea levels. Louisiana is losing an estimated football field of land an hour. And there are many factors that contribute to that land loss: subsidence, sea level rise, the oil and gas industry with its pipelines and canals, saltwater intrusion, ecosystem collapse, invasive species, just to name a few things. And so some of the background and the reason why subsidence and sea level rise is such an issue is because Louisiana's delta is very young. It was only deposited within the past 10,000 years. And it's at or below sea level, around 0 to 1.5 meters. And you can see here how low-lying this delta is compared to some of the rest of the United States. And the problem with Louisiana is that it's not really a coastline, as you would think about it. It is this wet, marshy, muddy place where inland bodies of water continue to grow larger rather than a gradually eroding coastline. And so the problem with Louisiana is that because it is so young and because it is at or below sea level, the clay minerals are very fluffy, and over time those compact in something called subsidence. And when you have sea level rise due to global warming, that sinking land along with rising sea level gives it that dramatic land loss that we're seeing today. Hurricanes also play a big factor in some of the land loss. We are currently losing our barrier islands, which normally helps us to protect our coast against the high wave impacts. But because of some of these barrier islands that are being lost, the coast is experiencing more impacts from hurricanes than before. Oil and gas exploration drives this subsidence. You can see in this picture just how expansive and extensive these oil and gas pipelines are all around our coast. And you can just imagine that this has some kind of effect on the land that exists. And you can see here from 1941 to 1964, up until 1981, just how much these oil and gas fields exploded throughout the decades. And these oil and gas structures end up staying there. They never remove them. And so it ends up sinking the land even further driving that subsidence. Some straight line canals, because of oil and gas exploration and shipping, have caused saltwater intrusion, which has damaged the plants and the ecosystem around it, and is a big food insecurity problem. We're no longer really able to plant in the soil because of the salinity, and it's just a food insecurity problem. And you can see just how extensive these canals are. Before, the winding waterways would allow for the salt water to kind of stay out and for there to be a gradual increase in the freshwater ecosystem. But now saltwater is just flooding in, which has devastating impacts on the natural species and plants that exist within coastal Louisiana. And all of these issues are disproportionately impacting Native Americans, not only physically, but socioeconomically. And not only that, but there are also problems within the state government. So the Louisiana Coastal Master Plan is a plan to resettlement Louisiana within 50 years. But the tribes down south don't have 50 years. Chief Sherrill says that we're lucky to have 20 to 25, depending on how storms impact the coast. And the problem with this is that Louisiana has this act called the Land Reclamation Act, which says that if lands are sunken and then rebuilt, the state then has access to those lands, which effectively wipes away the land ownership by Native American communities. And not only that, it also gives them mineral rights and access to those lands, which just contribute to the further degradation of the coast and these communities. So it's no secret that all of these tribal communities have not been in control of their own destiny. There are big decision makers that don't even include natives in the conversation, and we have to live with every decision and consequence that comes through. There is a legacy of exploitation that goes way beyond what is happening with climate change today. And these new decisions with climate, and as these new decisions with climate change adaptation, it just continues to pile on impact after impact on these frontline communities. And the point of this session is to talk about language and mapping and how historical context can also have a detrimental effect on Native communities. And so I will stop sharing my screen and I will let some of the tribal leaders talk about their communities and the impacts they've faced.
I guess I'm first.
I'll start with you.
All right. I remember the first hurricane. Okay. I was young and very, very young. I don't know if I was born yet, but anyway, in 1957, Hurricane Audrey came around. Okay, and we stayed on the island, Isle of St. Charles. I refer to it as island, and you know, we had land protecting us. We had the Barry Islands protecting us, and then finally, you know, when well, actually, they had dug the oil field had already started digging canals, and so the water started coming in. So from 1957 to, well, less than 10 years, because 1964 was Hilda, 1965 was Betsy, and you know, we could see, because we went, you know, they had some oil companies that had docks, so we would go and get the wood, because the docks would break, and we would go pick up wood, and we could see all the openings of marsh that was more water and more water. Because somebody asked me, when did we notice? But you know, we did never kept an eye on how much water well, how much land we was losing. But you know, so but we seen it, but we didn't pay attention to it. So, but you know, when the canals were dug, you know, my dad died at 62. Uh, but anyway, uh, they dug the canals, and you know, my dad had to travel probably for a half hour, 45 minutes to get to his fishing ground. Then when they dug the canal, it took 10 minutes. So we thought it was great. And my mama had a garden in on one of the dirt that the canals that had put there. So she had put a garden. And well, one day she was waiting for my dad, because my dad would bring her to the garden by boat, and she was waiting for the for my dad, and she was sitting on a bucket, and she was seeing some fish jumping. So the next day she brought her fishing line, and she caught more. Well, it was saltwater fish now. Okay, she caught more fish than my dad did. So you know it. So now that I know that we was being washed out, but now you know I don't know if y'all seen the latest picture of the island, but it's just a kind of a causeway. The road is just kind of a causeway going to, I don't know if the causeway over Lake Pontchartrain, basically the same thing, it's just a road. And then when you get to the community, we have a rain levee around it, but everybody calls it the bathtub because it's 7 foot tall, and we're on outside against the Gulf. Uh, so then when water comes in, now the water can't spread, so it stops against the hurricane protection levee, so it rises a lot faster. Our bathtub fills up, and the houses that aren't on blocks uh, floods, and then also the houses that are raised. You know, the hurricane from Katrina on and Gustav in '08, they uh, took the treetops off, so that the trees are shorter and the house are higher. So when there's some strong wind, the houses get beat up by the wind. So they can't, they're not protected by the trees, because now they had to raise them to not to flood, but then the wind gets them. So it's a no-win situation on the island. So now I'll let I know I didn't do a very good
Chief
presentation,
Albert,
but anyway,
it's let me ask you a question. Can you speak to if your tribal community has had any say on what's happened to your community and how it's been impacted by not being identified in maps and documents? Can you speak a little bit to that?
yes. No, we had no say so. We fought really hard in 1998 to get uh, well the ring levies. So they call the ring levy. So we had in 1999 they built the levee on the east side, but then it took 10 years for them to get on the west side. So we had hurricanes that would come, but you know the levee didn't do any good. So no, we didn't have any say so. But we fought also to get the road elevated, but they elevated it I think it was 18 inches, and then as soon as they elevated, maybe they had some trucks, and you know, and it's kind of like a, a road on pontoons. It just sinks. So now the road well, actually, yeah, yesterday it was underwater. So well, I heard one of my nieces said that she couldn't get to the island because of the water. But no, we have no say so. And actually, I asked because I forget when it was. It was a few years back anyway. That when that they was going to try to preserve the well, I won't say the barrier island, or in other words, preserves some, basically more on the east side, where Leeville is at. And so I asked, I said, well, are we included in the restoration? She said, oh no, y'all outside the hurricane protection limit. So we're not going to restore anything outside the hurricane protection limit. So no, we have no say. So they just do what they want, and hopefully they'll get rid of us. I didn't say that, but it's the truth.
Yeah, thank you. Now we're going to hear from Chief Sherrell. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So in reference to language and mapping and the impacts that it's had on the community of Grand Caillou-Dulac, my tribe is one of many tribes that are pursuing federal acknowledgement, which is it's a very gut-wrenching process that requires you to meet 7 mandatory criteria, and we are the only group that is required to do that. And because of writers like John Reed Swanton, who briefly visited our tribal territory back in 1907, he interviewed our ancestors, and then he created his published works, which were completely different from his field notes. He misidentified my people and many others that he encountered, so we're not the only ones that has happened to. Fortunately for our people, the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Smithsonian had Swanton's field notes, which they were able to review, right? And actually found true information in his field notes rather than his published works where he misidentified us. And we'll never know why he did that. Yeah, but that has really caused a lot of harm to our tribe and other tribes that he encountered because he misidentified who we are. And it's because, you had a lot of these people coming into these areas wanting to do research. You had others that were coming into the areas because they wanted to become landowners, right? They had their own agenda as to why they came into these areas. And almost every single time that happened, it was definitely not a positive impact on these tribal communities. It was definitely very negative for my own. And we are resilient, and we have not allowed those harms of the past to prevent us from being who we are or changing who we are. But with those types of things, like John Reed Swanton's work, you also have these different maps that have been put out, which are completely wrong. You're really not going to see any maps from the past that were created by the peoples who actually lived in their territories. These are things that we're pursuing today, working with different people to create these maps and to accurately show where our people are currently, where they have been historically, so that we can correct the record, hopefully once and for all, and prevent any further miseducation of the future generations.
Thank you. Ms. Teresa, you're up next. Can you speak a little bit about maybe how your community has been impacted by decision makers that don't include your voice in the decisions, and maybe how maps and documents have worked negatively against your community rather than positively?
Well, like everybody else, we don't have any say so. And can you hear me?
Yes.
We don't have any say-so in the planning or anything like the restoration, like everyone else. We don't have any say. They don't have any plans to do hardly any restoration in our area. And like you said in your presentation, how fast we're washing away. Well, where the coast where we're the first line, people to get the impact of the erosion, we don't have a say-so in their restoration. We've made recommendations, but it's like talking to the wall. And our beaches are just about all gone. And the mapping, well, we're not even on the map really, except, to say Pointe is here, but as far as the tribe, like other tribes are, like when they do the census, we should be all the tribes should be marked, and we're not. And we tried working with them in 2010 so that we would be put on the maps, but we were still left out. So hopefully they'll do a better job. Hope they're doing a better job this time. But we're having to do like everyone else, having to elevate homes and struggling with stronger storms. And but as far as having a say in what should be done, they don't even ask. I mean, when they have meetings, we tell them what we know that should be done, because we know our community. They come in and they think they know our community, but they don't know our community. They don't know what it's doing to these different areas, or doing to by washing away, what they're doing to our fishing industries, what they're doing to our sacred mounds, what they're doing to our cemeteries. And we're in the Morganza, we're in the levee system, but what good does that do for our cemeteries and our mounds? If nothing is done further out there, well, then we'll lose our mounds and our cemeteries. And I've always wondered, why do they call it Morganza to the Gulf? And they're putting the Morganza so close. It's right in back of our tribal building. So one day it hit me, because the Gulf is going to be right there. If nothing is done, it will be right behind our tribal building. And sure, the Morganza levee is there, but once that Gulf gets to that levee, it's gonna swallow us up. So, it's important to have our maps to be marked on the map, and also let them know where our sacred grounds and our cemeteries are, because they go in there and want to work, and do stuff without even asking. So we need to be on a map. We need to be able to show where we are. It's very important.
Miss Rosina, would you like to speak?
Yes. We're taking time out today to share our stories with everyone that has joined us. We tell our stories not as a form of entertainment, but as a way of storytelling. For us as a way of remembering, of recording our history, of teaching. And we're using our stories so that, you can see, have a glimpse of who we are. I know we have a short window here in our joining on this call, to let you see who we really are. But that's what our stories are meant to convey, just let you see who we are as a people. In my community of Grand Bayou. We are Atakapa-Ishak-Chawasha. We are descended from the Aboriginal people of Louisiana. You know, we have always been coastal people. You know, in our story of origin, you know, we came from the sea. You know, we are the first people of the land, myself and the other tribal people on this call. You know, and we are still here because of our indigenous perspective and our way of being, our stewardship to, you know, the land. We recognize that our lives are possible only because of the existence of the other lives surrounding us. You know, we embrace and acknowledge, you know, that symbiotic connection. There are many negatives that we have faced over our inhabitation. Um, as you heard on the others mention, you know, much of it, it's not been of our doing. We have not been consulted, and they've happened. But we do not fuel our lives with the negative energies. We see and we recognize, you know, these negative challenges we face, but we embrace and internalize the positive energies still around us and with us. And it's those positive aspects that strengthen the resolve to endure and to work for a better future, a future of sustainability and balance. Because right now, on a global level, our world is out of balance. And, you know, those evidences are visible, you know, in the way the climate has, you know, changed to the point where things that were predictable are no longer predictable. So words, both spoken and written, have the power to uplift or diminish. And oftentimes our people, our community are defined by the negative circumstances that we have faced or are facing. You know, seemingly innocuous terms like marginalized community, at-risk community, impoverished people. Those terms immediately set the tone and portrays, you know, the people or the community in a weak or negative light. And, you know, these words do not reflect who we truly are. You know, we are still here, still indigenous, you know, because of our resilience, because of our traditional ecological knowledge of being able to adapt and adjust to an imperiled environment. You know, our longevity speaks for itself, the ingenuity, you know, all of this speaks to strength of the people, of who we are. And that's what we want to project and portray. Yes, we know that we're facing and we have faced all of these negatives, but don't, you know, they don't see us for who we truly are. And that's a disservice to the people that have managed to maintain a lifeway. And I think when those terms are used to define, you know, these our indigenous populations, it's a re-victimization of sorts. And that's why we have to, you know, take control of the narrative. We have to change those definitions. We have to, you know, claim our sovereign right of being able to self-determine and self-define. And as you heard others on the call mention about how the cartographers have mislocated, you know, tribes, changing our boundaries and our territories, you know, changing, you know, the locations of our tribal lands. And some of that has been through ignorance, but much of it has been by deliberation. You know, it's deliberately done. And so today we find that, you know, we are tasked with trying to undo those, you know, those wrongs and those misrepresentations when we're trying to show, you know, our territories and our continued inhabitation in our ancestral lands. And that's daunting because not only is it time consuming, but it's also energy, resource consuming. And many of us, you know, we do not have the resources to expend on something like that, but it's necessary that we do it because our future is tied to making those corrections. You know, so much has been written about the people by non-Indigenous people. You know, documents created have found their way into the record books and the pages of history. And our chief, in a conversation that's on this call right now, one of our chiefs, Chief Sorrell, she mentioned that, and these misconceptions continue to be regurgitated, you know, because that's it, you know, over and over again. And, you know, moving forward, we have to find a way to correct these inaccuracies, you know, to uncover the future. We need to rewrite the narrative. We need to self-define. And because all of these things that are done or said about us were never by us, because paper was never our medium. And we can no longer allow, you know, these documents or these terms to continue to disenfranchise us the way it has in the past. Thank you.
Can I say something? Okay, I want to, I guess, say that, you know, due to, well, I guess people listening to us, okay, we tried to relocate 3 times, okay? The first time was in 2002, which was the Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers wanted 100% of the tribal on the island to say that they was gonna relocate. And I, in my 74 years, I don't know that anybody could get 100% of anything. Not even if you offer the piece of cake, somebody's gonna turn it down. The second time that we did it was in 2009. Then we was gonna move next to a subdivision, and the I'm gonna say that the white folks there that was in that subdivision said that that they didn't want us there. I mean, they didn't tell it to us, but we heard it through well, my wife and my niece. They just said if them Indians move there, they're going to devalue our property. And then the last time we knew we had it because we had we received the money, and but then the state took over and they did I guess I don't know exactly what they did, but they were talking about, well, no, we was to put our tribe, all of our tribe reunite together in one place. And we worked, well, Dr. Peterson is there. She can vouch for me. But we work and worked to get a deal, the grant from it was from Hurricane Sandy, the money left over, and they had $1 billion that Obama said that it was going to help out communities that was affected by a hurricane. So we was one of them, and we did a great plan. We had a few phases that we had to go through, but we did, and at the end we came out 5th out of 13 communities that was going to get money, and so we figured we had it, because you know our total budget for the community would have been like 110 million. So we received 48 million. So we figured we almost halfway there. So, but then the state ran off with the money. So the Indians, well, they're going to move the Indians from the island, but from what we calculate, instead of putting us together, they separated us even more. So yeah, our government doesn't listen to us at all. Thank you.
Just want to take some time to mention that, please, everybody, feel free to submit your questions, whatever you're curious about. If you want to know more, if you want to know something more specifically, ask some questions. We're here to talk to you. So I thought, Ms. Christina, do you want to introduce yourself to people and maybe talk a little bit? We haven't had a chance to speak yet.
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm Christina Peterson. I'm the facilitator with the Lowlander Center, and I'm honored and privileged to live in the territory that the rest of these panelists are, that's their home. And I am honored that they allow me to be part of their home. And so through my work with Lowlander, which Teresa is the president of Lowlander, and Rosina is on the board of Lowlander. We work on issues that are community, tribal directed, to find ways in which of supporting the community to solve that problem or issue. And as Chief Albert had mentioned, we worked with him for many years on the different honing of the plans that they had made for resettlement. And we're not done. We're going to continue working on that, aren't we, Chief? And so we're a participatory process that wants to push aside the kinds of assumptions that Elder Rosina was talking about, with the assumptions that a lot of folks come into communities, and when they have those assumptions, they sometimes own those assumptions, which then become prejudice or ways in which of framing and seeing communities or people. And in that, then over time, it defines people in a different way, as far as what Chief Sherrill was talking about with Swanson. So it's exceedingly important, I see, that anybody who's not part of the tribal community or is invited in understands that it's a humbling experience, and not something that is a privilege or a right by somebody from the outside. And it behooves the person coming in to be able to understand and listen and be directed by the community, by the tribal community. And as all the folks on this panel have talked about, the wisdom and ingenuity, indigenuity of the tribes have always astounded me, as far as just it moves me, and it moves me to be a better person, moves me to be to learn new ways, and it moves me to continue to find ways in which to support the efforts that the tribal communities are pursuing. And so that's kind of who I am with the Lowlander Center, in conjunction with all the tribes and the folks that are in this call and others who are not. And thank you, Devin. Thank you, young Chief.
There's also a question in the chat, comes from Jamie Bynum. I hope I'm saying that right. Is there any concern that modern mapping might cause issues between tribes, such as more than one tribe claiming the same area? Maybe Chief Sherrill has something to say?
Yes, thank you, young Chief. I'll take that one, because that's something that many tribes have had to experience. Yeah, as many people may not understand, you know, tribes historically did not believe in ownership of the earth, right? The earth was here for everyone. However, modern day is a very different thing, and people have been made to be grounded in place. In many situations, there have been tribes that have had disputes over territory. And yes, that's always going to be a concern. However, there are many historical records Preferably not anything that has been necessarily written. You know, these tribes may have to actually go and look for their historical records between, you know, different agreements with the Spanish that came here, you know, that made agreements with these tribes in their lands. You know, those types of documents, treaties, even though we know that all of those things are not honored, right? In many cases, it does state the agreement between the tribes. And truthfully, it's up to the tribes to sit down in peace and discuss what is best for their people, right? You know, oftentimes tribes find that we are pitted against one another for resources, which is a very unhealthy manner that is not traditional to any of us, because we have always been a very loving people and caring for all peoples, you know, but that is something that really should be done between the tribes. You know, really sitting down and figuring out what's in the best interest of all their peoples.
I'd like to say something. Yeah, I can remember even up until time that I was a young girl, where we had our central location of the village, but then we also had these other places that we migrated to depending on the season and what activity. Like we had the winter grounds that we would leave the main village and go to the trapping and hunting grounds in the winter, which took us away from, you know, our primary location. But we were not the only tribe that used those lands. So it was like lands that we occupied temporarily, but it was transitional lands. So you find many tribes overlapping in territories depending on the times of the year and the usage, neither claiming ownership, but both acknowledging that that's part of the tribal footprint, the territories that they occupy. And I think you know, you will find many of those overlapping spaces. So it's, you know, I think that as a people, as an indigenous people, we need to acknowledge that there were spaces that more than one tribe made use of, and you know, not do the things that are more modern as far as saying I own it and you do not, you know, might is right kind of stuff. That it's not an indigenous concept. And I think if we approach these claims and discussions with a more indigenous perspective, and I think we come away with knowing that possession, I think it's not the intent, you know, when it comes to storing and claiming and hoarding something away to yourself, but more holistic way of seeing land and resources as a sharing. I think it would hold truer to the indigenous perspective of way of being, you know, with the earth and with the environment, and more towards what the creator had intended our habitation to look like.
Young Chief, something that has been very frustrating for me, not being part of the tribes that are represented here, but working alongside or with some of your projects and some of the kinds of work, is that I've been tasked a lot of times with doing the grant writing or finding resources. And I remember one time when I was trying to find some resources for Elder Rosina's community after Katrina, And the people were telling me that that I was going to, that there were no tribes in that area because they looked at a map and there was nobody identified in that area. And then on other times when I mentioned who the tribe is, well, no, they don't exist because they're not on the federal list. So there's different kinds of ways of defining and showing. And then many times when Chief Albert and I were in meetings together in various places around the state, and we would go into buildings and there would be a big state map and there would be no indication of the map of the people who inhabit the areas that these tribes that are on this panel inhabit. And it's another name. And so people will assume that that map is right because it's written down and it's on something that's public, and you're wrong because you're misrepresenting. And so there's been many times when my representation of a place has been called into question, or I've been called a liar. And it's because people have taken that is, that map has become the one and only. And it's true because it's in a museum or it's in a public place. And so that becomes not just, it becomes structural violence, and it becomes a handicap also for getting resources that are critical. And so to me, this is such a serious issue, both from the standpoint of legitimacy and of recognition and of the of being identified in place.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't really go into this too much, but I do research at Williams College looking at the land loss in Louisiana and how it is disproportionately impacting the Native communities that exist down south. Before, whenever I did my research, I ended up doing Grand Caillou-Dulac, but I've also extended it to Pointe and Ile-de-Jean-Charles, because I remember when because my project came out of one of my classes, and it was a final project that I was doing. It was open-ended, and I was allowed to kind of do whatever I wanted, and this is what I wanted to do. And whenever I started my initial search, there was nothing in the scientific literature about the Native American communities who are experiencing the land loss in terms of subsidence and sea level rise, and analyzing these communities and exactly how much land loss is happening, because these tribes know that they're being disproportionately impacted by coastal land loss. They've seen it erode in their own backyards. They have stories to tell you about it, but it's not in the literature. And so that's been mostly my point of doing this kind of research, is to put that in the literature, to put our narrative out there in a paper-dominated world. And so I remember even looking for the data to try and look at the tribes. The first thing that I looked at was census data, and there was no data that showed any of the tribal communities down south. And that's something that a lot of scientists use to look at some communities. And so if there's no data there, and all of these people who are doing science and doing these kinds of things, it's basically like these communities don't even exist. And so when governments and researchers and corporations are doing their work and making these decisions at the detriment of these communities, it's almost like they don't exist. And they're not making the effort to go to these communities, to be involved, to have conversations, and to involve themselves. They're just kind of on a screen, away from the communities and looking at the data that doesn't even accurately represent the tribal communities that exist. There's another question
about indigenous language. Okay, basically down on the golf course, I mean, we was part of the Trail of Tears, where we came south. Choctaws, Biloxi, Chitimacha was always here. But anyway, basically on the golf course, we spoke the Muskegon language, and then the French took us over, and then they taught us French. So basically, our I guess our language was French because we speak French. So the French took our native language away because you know, they wanted us, and so we spoke French. We actually when we hid uh, from the the soldiers, they didn't find us till 1880 because it was coming to some census, and they said, well, this land here, this area here is uninhabitable. So, but we was there. But we all spoke French because we was hiding from. Actually, I'm gonna tell you a story. This has nothing to do with language, but in 1953, our road was built, was finished going to the island, and so my mom, I was a little bitty boy. So when my mom says, if you see or hear a car coming, go hide because they're gonna take you away. You know, and she knew about the boarding school. So yeah. But anyway, our native language here is French. We trying to learn Choctaw, but we don't have enough time. We had too many Zoom meetings. I'm kidding. Yeah, but that's my story about the language. I know. Probably Teresa has more than that because she's a smart woman.
And this question that he's referring to comes from Catherine White, which asks, could anyone speak to the role of Indigenous language and community or community identity?
That's the one that Chief Albert just touched on, young Chief. And again, like Chief Albert said, in pretty much the coastal indigenous communities, they're going to speak a French dialect. We actually did work with a linguist several years back, Natalie Dyko, who did come in to study our language, and she found that we spoke a jargon, right? And it did still hold native indigenous language, but each community was a little different than the next. However, we were all able to communicate because we shared a similar jargon. And yes, our communities still speak this language today. You know, as a matter of fact, if we were to go up into the northern part of the state that speaks a different type of the French, there's going to be some words that are going to be different that they won't understand, because of the differences in the coastal indigenous communities. So yeah, we do still have that language, and we are working on language preservation programs, and also working on regaining full use of our historical tribal languages as well.
We identify the language that we speak today amongst our people, in community, as Indian French, because many of the words, our native words, are commingled with the Cajun French language. So it's different than the French that the Cajun descendants speak, in their communities, because but language is very important. It's a form of identity, of being, of knowing, of origins, and it helps to ground you, in your place, and kind of represent, your journey to the point that we are today. So there is a dictionary of our native language, and we are looking to try to connect with a linguist that maybe can take that written language and speak it into some type of vocalization where, like I know I think it was the Chitamacha that did it with one of the language programs, and they got things committed to some type of audio system, and the people were able to come into classes and learn. So we would love to do that, but for, since the commingling of the French when they were expulsed from their lands over in Nova Scotia, and they settled on the coast, and they married into the tribes, and they commingled not only their bloodline but their language with ours. We have spoken, this Indian French, and each tribal community that was inhabited and commingled with these newcomers, we have different words for different things, but as Chief Sherrill mentioned, we all still are able to communicate with each other because of some of the similarities of dialect.
And in our community, we've been trying to do a French immersion school because French is a dying language, but like Rosina's community as well, we call it Indian French because we have so many Choctaw words. I have a CD that we've been trying to learn the Choctaw language, and we found out that a lot of our French words are Choctaw. And maybe that's why when the French from Canada and France come, we sometimes can't communicate because they don't know. I may say a word and they have no idea what I'm talking about. And then also, if we could get a French immersion school going, maybe that would help them keep our school open. They're trying to close our school, and we have it's a large population of Native American students there, and we'd want to keep them in our community. But also we would like to see them learn the language, and the parents would have to also learn too, I guess, but they could teach the parents when they learn it. And our community does the same thing Rosina's community did at one time, travel to another place to do trapping. And we used to have some trapping in our community, but now with the land erosion, we no longer have the animals to trap, because where they used to trap now, they use a different kind of trap. They use a crab trap to fish crabs. So one industry, we lost one industry, but we do another industry in the place of where we used to trap. So, but yeah, we all the tribes here speak French, Indian French.
Okay, we have another question coming from Jamie Bynum. I hope I keep saying that right. And Krista McCracken has been posting these questions from the feed loop thing. So thank you, Krista. So he asked, is a small part of the lack of mapping by tribes and people historically due to the ideas of the earth having no owner? I assume the major reason is due to European restrictions / racism, but would this have also played a role? What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I think there are some negatives that the indigenous population, upon contact and continued interaction with the incoming European populations, have incorporated into their ways of being and thinking. And it's, in my opinion, it is to the detriment of the true way of living and being, with the earth. And part of it is to separate yourself and to look at the resources and the land as a commodity or as something to hoard. So there were some things that came with the newcomers that did not fit in with the way that the people lived before, when they looked at, the land and how to make use of the bounty that, we had access to. Now, you know, and it's unfortunate, that a lot of those concepts continue on today, when you see federal and non-federal, and people tend to pit themselves one against the other, where you're recognized, you're not recognized, where before, we recognize our indigenous, nature and selves. And now, we're using all of those different terminologies to maybe uplift, one group, and try to diminish the other. So that is not, the way, the indigenous way. That is not the native way. And that goes also, to the land and to the maps. All of these things play into where we find ourselves today. So that's why I say that we need to change the narrative. We need to reclaim the narrative, with indigenous concepts. And it's necessary moving forward, to live the vision of harmony and balance, and to return balance, to the global population that needs to be embraced.
Absolutely. And just, these types of things, like, for example, right, dealing with trying to get our territories placed on the census maps, right? And granted, these are census statistical areas, as they've chosen to label them, rather than fully identifying with our tribal communities and where we're currently located. We were able to participate for the 2020 census. It took that long. And they've been utilizing a colonial mapping system for forever now, but only in the 2020 census or have our tribal communities been able to participate on some level. And we even had to agree that that was inaccurate. That is not an indigenous system. That is not our traditional way. That is not our life way in respecting people in place. Just like closing of the Pointe elementary school, that these schools, and these areas where you can gather are so crucial for these communities, because they speak to the identity of that community. So what's going to happen is that once that school gets closed, these children are going to be uprooted from their own lifestyle, their own sense of knowing, their own sense of identity, and assimilated into a whole other area, into a whole other school, a whole other system of learning. Yeah, and those types of processes are the things that we're speaking towards. That all plays into this entire system that is being placed upon us, and have no consideration for the impacts that they're causing on indigenous peoples.
I think it's really interesting for me because I'm in a class right now called Food, Agriculture, and Globalization, and we're talking about food systems and how they operate. And they can tell us a lot about how our system operates overall. When Europeans first came, they looked at these indigenous systems and called them limited. They said that they were somehow limited, but they weren't. It was meant to feed the people, and we always had enough to feed the people, more than enough. But with these systems that have been implemented, it has been mostly driven by profit and overproduction. And that has had a severe impact, not only on communities, but the earth itself. The resources that we extract from are limited. And we have to think of sustainability. And we live in a society today where the overproduction of goods for profit is detrimental to a lot of these communities.
Maybe Elder Rosina and Also, Teresa, if both of you might be able to talk too about how maps coincide with your fishing areas and how that's changing, because that's another area when as land starts disappearing and the changing of the fisheries and who owns what rights to what areas. How does that impact?
Well, we live in a coastal environment and the landscape has always been in flux. The river would flood, and with those floodwaters would come new lands. It would take something away, put something, else in its place. And those places were continually in change. So that was part of how we lived, but the resources were given to us, the way our perspective, resources were given to us by the Creator for the benefit, of our lives moving forward. It was not for one over the other to claim and say, I own this, you do not, I have access to this, you do not. There was never, because as young Chief Devin mentioned, there was an abundance. We didn't have to compete with the systems of the world that sought to, hoard these resources and store it away as a commodity, so people can, then pay so that they can enrich themselves and set up, these dynasties more or less, or corner the market on a certain item or substance and say, well, now you have to pay me for this because it's not of our making these resources. It was there. It was a gift, to the people. So it's not our we share the waters, we share the land, we share the gifts that the Creator has bestowed upon us. And I think you know that saying, well, I own it and you don't, kind of that doesn't even equate. That doesn't come into our way of seeing and of being, and having to coexist with these entities that do commodify, the resources. I think that's part of the problem. It's part of the problem of the imbalance that we're finding, in the environment, and not only in our territories, but at a global level. And I think, looking at what we have access to in a different light is part of the lessons that we're advocating for, that people stop looking at, these resources that in part, that are being abused, and it will get to the point, because they're at the point where they're becoming non-sustainable and non-renewable, and it will be to the detriment of all populations, not only the indigenous population. So, that's part of the work that, we're trying to bring forward.
And in our area, because land loss, it's hard to identify the lakes and the bayous anymore. So mapping would help. And one way that Donald wants to do it as well, they already have their English names, but like our younger generation, when you tell them a lot of these lakes and bayous we have, they're named after our ancestors. And a lot of them are in French, that they named it that way because it was a place where they went fishing. Like La Coupanore, you tell that to a younger person, they have no idea what you're talking about. So Donald would like to also, and he's supposed to talk to Math Bethel about this too, about making a map, doing a map to where it'll mark all the bayous and all the lakes and mark them in the names that they know. And that way, you know, if they tell the person, well, this is where it's at, they'll know where it is. Because eventually everything, like you have very few bayous that are still connected. It's a bayou, but it looks like it's in with the lakes. So you have to know exactly where that bayou is. And an outsider comes, he just thinks he's, you know, riding in the lake, but he's not. He's really going through a bayou. So, you know, the maps are important for that part too. And pretty soon, like the cutoff canal, it's getting so wide that it'll eventually look like a lake if nothing's done as well. So mapping is very important in all the communities.
Did you see that question from Mariah Neal? Okay, she wants to know about the history. Okay, the history from what we've been reading is people go to the library, they read, and they write the same thing. In other words, there's nothing that is right about the history. Like I said, our postmaster at one time, he was writing history every week, and Sherman Gidry, Teresa. So he would write and write and write, but he had the wrong people. He was writing about the wrong people, and so if you want to do the actual history, come and listen to the old folks. Of course, the old folks are gone now, but we know some of the history. So if you want to help, in other words, you have to come down to the communities and talk to the people, not go read in the library, because the library is all wrong. So yeah, so I guess I can answer my question. I did that. No, the the history. Okay, BP, Teresa. When BP was there, there was going to do a history. I say, if you want to do a history, don't go to the library, don't go to the archives. Talk to the people, and write the history of the people. So yeah, that's the question. If you want to do history, come talk to the people.
Some of getting the maps reproduced and made is expensive. And that's something that would be wonderful if anybody that's listening in on this knows of where some grants could be done had, so that this group could come together to be able to produce those and then be able to present those to the various different museums and historical societies and public places in this region. But to do that does cost some money. So let me just be very blunt with that. I'm saying, you know, folks have connections to understanding where those resources are. Please be in touch with this group.
That actually gets into the next question I was going to ask. That comes from Jada Jones, which says, how can we help? How can the people listening in help the communities? And that was a great answer to that question, Christina.
Mm-hmm. There's a question from before. Does language play a major role in what you're working towards with the maps? And how is language beneficial or detrimental to the project? Well, the positive aspect that language brings to the map for us, you know, language shows inhabitation, who's where, and also many times you would have one person calling a place by one name and another tribe calling it by a different name because of the tribal differences in language, but we're speaking of the same place. So that shows cohabitation, that can aid in mapping territories, where it show that it can help to show that more than one tribe, had access and made use of these particular spaces. So that's one way that language can be beneficial in mapping, and also show who's not there. Oftentimes, there are tribal groups that are shown on maps of this is their territory, but through the names of places, something like Miss Lita Teresa said, through the different names of places, you can see who was not there. Because there's nowhere in their language where they're having shown, a name for or being part of that environment. So it works both ways.
And I think for me, thinking about my research project, language really informs ideas, right? And for me, I remember whenever I was initially doing my project, the term that I had always come across was marginalized. And Rosina had mentioned that marginalized is a very negative term that makes it seem lesser than, at risk, it's kind of negative. And so the term that I've been using is frontline communities, not only on the front lines of these issues, but on the front lines of helping to solve them and to work towards solving these issues. Like for me, using this term, I would take my research and go to conferences and present, and I'll be there representing the tribe, being on the front lines, advocating about these communities and the land loss and the issues that they face. And so language is important because it shapes ideas and the ideas that people have of our ideas. So. There's another question that came in. Can you speak about the significance of how creating these maps can help pass down internal Indigenous knowledge to future generations?
I'll share a brief story. Some of our young people, where their families had moved to other states to escape the repetitive loss from the storms, and they were raised in another place. And they had the opportunity to come back and revisit, our community at a brief visit. And so they went to the government offices to look up, some of the information about, their ancestors, and look up maps and whatever. And there was a lot of misinformation. So, and they came back to the community with what they have found. And of course, we had to explain to these young people, this is the truth. This is our truth. What you discovered or uncovered, in these other places was someone else's narrative, someone else's perspective, but yet that was the legal, right? According to the government, the legal information put out about, the ancestors and about the place. So in moving forward and to be able to carry the truth into the future, we need to have these corrections made. We need to have all of these documents, uh, with the correct terms, and show, the people for who the people really are, the places that we really occupy, the activities that we participate in, and our true selves. If not, we will continue to perpetuate these inaccuracies into the future, and it will come a point in time that those inaccuracies will become the truths of the next generation, and it will deprive the people forever of, their true nature, their true ways of being, and their true selves. So in order to move forward, for the next generation. I know we project, to the 7th generation. So in order to perpetuate and move the truth into the future to these next generations, these corrections need to be made now. We who find ourselves, with the energies are tasking ourselves and our allies, and in solidarity, we have, taken a stand to come together and to create, the documents speaking the truth, to change those misconceptions and to change these inaccuracies, because moving forward, that's the only way that our true selves will move forward with us into the future for the people coming behind us. We owe that to the future. And so that's what we're working for.
We've got about 8 minutes left in the panel. If anybody would like to ask any last question, or if anybody has any final concluding thoughts.
Now, I would just like to say, again, thank you for everyone that has joined us today. Thank you for letting us share, a glimpse into our lives and of what we're working on. And I hope that this is just a beginning. And at some other point in time, we will again cross paths, and what we're advocating for, we'll see it, the evidence of these things in some things that you produce, where the people are not being defined by the circumstances in your writings and in your works, that you will take our truths and incorporate them into your work so that it'll lighten our load considerably. And we just appreciate everyone joining us today.
There's something else about language that all of the folks here may want to mention, because it's been part of a conversation we've been having for the last couple of years. And that is the possibility of the tribes protecting their names due to others who try to utilize that name in other ways or for other purposes. And so to protect the name and protect the name of the place, otherwise it gets used or abused in other fashions for other reasons. I don't know if any of you want to speak to that.
I can speak to that. In many cases, we constantly have non-Indigenous people that write about us, okay, in different types of publications, law review, publishings, and this is based on the perception of this individual, right? When they choose to write about us for whatever reason that may be. And in many cases, we've found ourselves being portrayed in the negative. In many cases, we've found so many inaccuracies in their writings that it was appalling. It to a point that we were able to prove that these were blatantly inaccurate and driven by this particular person's own agenda, right? And yet it was still allowed to be published, even with being able to prove all of the inaccuracies. Our names have been used for everyone else's agenda. And we have found that it is important for us to find a means to protect our people even further, to protect our tribal names, to protect our place, of modern day. so that we can hopefully prevent any future damages, to our people and our tribes, because we've been dealing with this for hundreds and hundreds of years now, and even today. So that's the whole idea behind legally protecting our tribal names and our places, is, so that we control the narrative, we control our identity as it needs to be portrayed by our people from our perspective, which is truth.
Yeah, we ran into an instance where this person from a university was being paid to interview some of the coastal tribes. Well, her approach was very disrespectful. She did not follow protocols, and the people, wouldn't engage in conversation with her. So she ended up interviewing people that had no tribal connections to us at all. And that's what she based her paper on, which then became part of a dissertation and got published. And it was totally inaccurate. Like I said, the names of the place were inaccurate. The names of the people she interviewed was, garbled, and it was just one mistake after the other. But yet anybody reading that would think, oh yeah, well, she did her job, now it's being published, and others having access to that think that this is the truth. So it's those kind of instances that, it's why we set up, a protocol of approach called the Declaration of Principles, where anyone wanting to interact with the tribes, you first meet with a core group where, you're being vetted before being introduced. And many people try to skip, that whole process and whatever, but we have learned, because of, what I've mentioned before and what Chief Sherrill just mentioned, it's to our detriment just to let people have a free reign to and access to tribal people, because oftentimes, what they write, and we have no control over their publishings, but we need to find ways to be able to protect, the people from those publishings, those writings. It all goes back to, controlling the narrative.
Okay, so we are pretty much at time. We're about a minute out. So I think that we're just going to conclude our panel, unless anybody has any pressing thoughts. Okay, so we're just going to conclude our panel today. I just want to say thank you for listening. The common theme that we've discussed throughout the panel is people not listening to our voices, people not wanting to listen and not giving our voices a stage. And this was that. You coming and lending your ears and listening to us and hearing what we have to say means a lot. So thank you for taking the time to come and hear what we have to say, to listen to the leaders and change makers of these communities, and maybe even connecting in the future if you have any ideas of how to move forward. So thank you, everybody who's come. Thank you to all the panelists who have been involved. And I'm just going to say goodbye for now.
Bye.